Hello and welcome to Headlines. This is Aryeh Lebowitz. I'm filling in for Dovid this week, and we have a fascinating program this week. You know, a few months ago there was a little bit of a controversy or a debate over what seems to have become a phenomenon in many Jewish communities, and that is that even outside of traditional Hasidic communities, there's a heavy emphasis on Chassidus. In modern Orthodox communities, you find increased emphasis on Chassidus. In certain Litvish Yeshivas, there are a lot of people that are emphasizing Chassidus more than they ever did. And when a person studies Chassidus, it's very difficult to study Chassidus without knowing a certain amount of Kabbalah. When we were kids, we were always told that Kabbalah can only be studied by a select few, and it has to be a direct Menorah from a Rebbe, and it has to be someone who already knows all of Shas and Poskim backwards and forwards, and it has to be someone who's at least the age of 40, and there are all these qualifications. And now you find that there's this increased popularity in this limud. So the issue we're going to deal with in this week's show is this a positive thing? Why is this happening? And is this supposed to happen? What about all those requirements? What about all of those prerequisites? Why is it that our generation feels this need to study these areas of Torah, what was previously considered hidden elements of Torah, Torah's Hanistar, or what some would call Pnimius HaTorah, the inner elements of the Torah, and do we have prerequisites of being able to study these areas of Torah? So we're going to talk this week with two fantastic guests. Rav Moshe Weinberger, who is the Rav of Aish Kodesh in Woodmere, person who brought Chassidus to a community in Woodmere that had previously not really been exposed to Chassidus, and certainly not to this kind of learning and this kind of talking about Torah Sinister and Pnimius HaTorah. And Rabbi Roberts will explain why he thinks all of this is happening, and it should be really a fantastic, eye-opening, enlightening show. We're also going to deal with the issue of whether there are any pitfalls aside from just the learning, but if a person is constantly fed positive messages about how Hashem loves you and everything is good and everything is great, so there are those that are concerned that maybe a person will start to believe that it doesn't really matter what I do, that Shmiras HaMitzvot doesn't matter, that being careful about how I behave doesn't matter, because Hashem loves me anyway. I can do whatever I want because Hashem loves me. So is that a legitimate concern? How do we fight that concern? So Bezos Hashem will be discussing these issues in this week's show with our fantastic guest. Okay, now it's time for this week's riddles. Riddle number one is a shaila that I was asked a little while ago. I got a call from a woman who was stuck in Idaho for Shabbos. She had nothing with her, no food with her. She was able to go to the closest supermarket and find a box of challah rolls somehow, but she didn't have any kosher wine or grape juice. And then she finally uncovered one little box of kosher grape juice that she was able to buy. Let's assume it's enough for 1 cup of grape juice. And now she's got the whole Shabbos ahead of her, and she's got to say Kiddush on Friday night, and Kiddush on Shabbos day, and Havdalah, but she's only got 1 box of grape juice. So what should she do with this grape juice? How should she apportion this grape juice over the course of Shabbos? So the truth is, it doesn't seem like much of a riddle because it's a beferish halacha in Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch paskins that what you should do is dilute it. Since you can dilute wine and it would still be kosher and it would still be considered wine, you could dilute wine up to 6-to-1 ratio, it would still be considered wine. But let's assume that is not so pashut over here, because this is already diluted. It's contemporary grape juice that we have that you could buy in the store that's already been diluted a lot, and she's maybe not able to dilute it. So what should she do? Should she make Kiddush on Chamar Medina on Shabbos day? Should she make Kiddush on Challahs on Friday night? Should she do both of those things and save it for Havdalah? How does one go about deciding what comes before what and how to paskin this halacha? So that is riddle number one. Riddle number two is something that Dovid had sent me to ask as one of the riddles. The pasuk tells us that Vayitzak Moshe el Hashem al dvar hatzvardiim, that Moshe Rabbeinu cried out. Tza'aka means to cry, to scream. That Moshe was screaming out to Hashem on account of the tzvardiim. So the question is, there's a Beferish Gemara Mesechus Brachos from Chavdalet and Beis, Hamashmiya Kolo B'Tfilaso, Hariz Miktanei Amana, that a person who raises his voice in Tefillah is said to lack Emunah on some level. That a person is not supposed to raise his voice in Tefillah, he's not supposed to scream in Tefillah. So how is it that Moshe Rabbeinu was, and it says V'Magbia Kolo B'Tfilah, Hariz Minvi'ah Abal, that if a person is Magbia Kolo in Tefillah, if he raises his voice even more, he's considered to be Minvi'ah Abal. So how could it be that Moshe Rabbeinu was allowed to scream in his Tefillah, this tza'aka that he let out? Now the truth is, according to the sheet of the Aliyah Rabbah in our Chaim Simon Kuf Aleph, the Yisr of Tza'aka B'Tfilah is only during Shmona Esrei. And that's the sheet of the Netziv and Hamek Sheila Shilta Kuf Mem Gimelos Hey as well, that it's only an issue during Shmona Esrei. So that would not be a problem. Moshe Rabbeinu Mistama was not davening Shmona Esrei. However, Magen Avraham in Simon Kuf Aleph, Sifkan Gimel quotes that the Arizal would not even be Mashmia Kolo in Psukei de Zimra. He wouldn't even daven loudly in Psukei de Zimra. That he was very makpid that the tefillah should be dafka quietly, because the Pri Megadim explains in Aish Avram, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu hears us even when we whisper, HaKadosh Baruch Hu hears us even when we don't say it out loud, and it shows a lack of emunah to make it seem that we have to yell in order for Hashem to hear. And the Mishnah Berurah, Sivkon Zayin, paskins like that Pri Megadim, that in general in tefillah we have to be very quiet in our tefillah. It happens to be that there's a discussion in I think Rav Mordechai Eliyahu in his Tshuva Sefer has a whole discussion of the interplay between Kabbalah and Halacha. Nogea to our topic this week, the whole discussion about how Kabbalah affects Halacha and Halacha affects Kabbalah. And one of the things that he suggests is that in Yemos HaMashiach, when it comes time comes time that's close to Geula, there's going to be an increased emphasis on Kabbalah, not to ever chas v'shalom go against the halacha, but a slight movement in minhag toward more Kabbalistic minhagim. And maybe that's why, even though the Shulchan Aruch paskins, Mordechai Eliyahu writes, even though the Shulchan Aruch paskins that a person when he davens Shmona Esrei is supposed to be mashmiya la'azno, he's supposed to daven it loud enough that he can hear himself say the words. Many people have moved away from that. Many people say Shmona Esrei so quietly that they don't even hear the words themselves. And it could be that that's a nod to Kabbalah, because that's the Arizal's minhag, is to always be extremely quiet. The Zohar also, to be extremely quiet in one's tefillah. But be that as it may, la halacha, a person is certainly not allowed to scream in tefillah. So why is it that Moshe Rabbeinu was allowed to scream in tefillah? I was particularly moved by this shaila because in my first sefer, Hakona Olamo, I have a whole essay on the topic of davening out loud, being mashmiya kol b'tefillah. So if anyone wants to, anyone has the sefer, you can cheat and get the answers there. But there are a few answers to this question, so that is riddle number 2. Before we move on, let's go to the answers for last week's riddles, the winners of last week's riddle.
Hi, Dovid. I just heard the riddle of the week. I want to give an answer. The riddle that was asked about also davening mashchina, that was only Moshe Rabbeinu. How come it's kapaskin to halacha? So the famous answer is the answer from Rav Yankiv Kamenetsky. It says in Emes Yankiv on the Parsha, in Parsha Shmois, that we see from here a limud gadol. In Chinuch, he says that for every child, a little child, there's a hope that maybe he'll also be able to be medaber in mashchina, and that's how we have to go to all of Chinuch of our children, to be medaber them ki'il, that one day they'll be medaber in mashchina. In such a oifen, they'll grow up to be gedolim. And I heard once a story that there was a prominent Rosh Yeshiva from Brooklyn, once in Detroit, for a bris, and he asked this question that you posed, that if it's only Pesh also Labar Mashchina, and he was trying to get at Rabbi Yankiv Kamenetsky's terrace, and the blade boxes by the bris, and he started screaming, "How could you ask your question? Every child is going to learn the Kehillas of Torah, and a person that's learning Torah is Kutcher B'richu, and his mamishki, Kashem Yisn Tuner, Kashem Yisn Pirdaf Tsvuna, that it's mamish from the Piv of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and every child that's learning Torah is mamish Mistabik in Abayr, and then it's Zicher Peh also Damer Mashchina. On a similar note, there's Machshavas Musa and Maimach Chof Rav Shach, he says also that every child, it says Baruch Ata Hashem, talking Meloshin Noichach Kodesh Baruch Hu, and it says in the Gemara Baruch Hu Aish Misbal Kolei and Kuloi. So you see from here that it says Rav Shach that every child is mamash talking to Hashem, and with that it's Niskayim Pel Tadav Mashchina for every child. Thank you very much. That's the Negei of the riddle.
Now for Dvar Torah on Parshas Va'era, on next week's Parsha, Dovid suggested in the last few shows that instead of saying the Dvar Torah on this week's Parsha, where by the time everyone listens to it, it's already over, it's already passed, so we'll instead say Dvar Torah on this coming week's Parsha. So you know that we're all familiar with the 4 Lashonos of Geula that's represented on the Seder night, of course, with the Dalit Kosos, with the 4 cups of wine. The Torah would never describe the same exact thing 4 different times unnecessarily, meaning that would be redundant, and the Torah is never redundant. It is extremely careful, Kodesh Baruch Hu is extremely careful with maximizing every single word in the Torah HaKadosha. So everyone, all of the commentaries, tried to figure out what appears to be the difference between these 4 stages in the Geula process, or 4 levels of Geula. But the truth is that the last 3 Lashonos are pretty unambiguous, meaning working backwards. Clearly is accomplished at Kabbalah Satorah when we become the nation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The third expression, V'ga'alti eschem b'zroa netuya, is accomplished when we finally escape our Egyptian oppressors at Kriyas Yamsuf. Second expression, V'tzalti eschem me'avodasan, is when the slavery ended in Mitzrayim. The only really difficult one to account for is the first expression, V'otzesi eschem mitachas sivlos Mitzrayim. If it's not referring to the slavery itself, because that's the second expression, then what's that referring to? What exactly is V'otzesi eschem mitachas sivlos Mitzrayim? You know, when the Rogatchover Gaon in Dvinsk many years ago, there lived 2 great Gedolim, 2 great once-in-a-generation type of Gedolei Yisroel. The Rogatchover Gaon and Rav Meir Simcha Midvinsk, the Baal Meshech Chachma, the Baal Or Sameach. So the Meshech Chachma died first. He passed away before the Rogatchover. So the Rogatchover had to be Maspid Rav Meir Simcha. Now it's known that the Rogatchover was a tremendous Baal Kishron. His genius was unparalleled. He was so sharp, so quick. That was his unique koach, totally unique, more so than anyone else, it seems, in his generation. Rav Meir Simcha was not known as being the world's greatest Baal Kishron. Rav Meir Simcha was a great gadol, a great Talmud Chacham, and did so even though he didn't possess the genius of the Rogatchover to that degree, as much as we can measure these things when you're talking about Gedolei Olam. But the Rogatchover noted this in his hesped from Meir Simcha, and he gave an unbelievable mashal for how a Meir Simcha becomes a Meir Simcha. He admired Meir Simcha's hasmada, his dedication, and he pointed out that when a fire breaks out, a person who desperately needs to escape will get this adrenaline rush, and he'll find himself capable of things he never would have dreamed that he was capable of, withstanding incredible heat, jumping from a high window, carrying several people at once to safety. When we really feel we need to accomplish something, when we really need to do something, when we want it and we need it, we somehow harness all of our natural kochos and accomplish beyond what we ever thought ourselves capable of. The Rogatchover said that for Meir Simcha, the house was always on fire. You know, when we sit to learn, we have a coffee, we enjoy. Okay, so we sit and we learn a little bit, and from Meir Simcha, knowing the Torah, knowing every word of the Torah Kedosha, all of Shas, all of Shulchan Aruch, everything it says in the Torah was a desperate situation. The house was on fire, and he harnessed all of his kochos, all of his energy, in order to be able to learn Kol HaTorah Kula. The energy and the desire evident in Meir Simcha's learning was a reflection of a house that was on fire, of what a person can accomplish when he really, really wants something. You know, the Sfas Emes in the Seches Sukkah writes that the expression Me'ashpos Yorim Evyon is a reference to the dreams, the hopes, and the desires of the Evyon, of the person who's destitute. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying that I'm going to give him the ability to want more, to dream higher. You know, they tell a mashal or a story of a schnorrer that came to Rothschild once. and the Rothschild was in a funny mood that day. So he says to the schnorrer, he says, tell me something. If you had all of my money, what would you do with it? And the schnorrer says, as he's being schlepping around from house to house to raise money, he says, Rothschild, if I had all of your money, do you think for a second that I would walk from house to house collecting money? I would hire a horse-drawn carriage to take me from house to house to collect my money that I need. And the idea of the story is that here you have a person who he can't get out of his own minimalist way of thinking. That a person, he just can't imagine what life would be like. He doesn't even realize that if you're Rothschild, you don't need to go around house to house schnorring money. That's not what you have to do for all of a sudden your whole life will change. But he just can't get out of his box, his way of thinking. He doesn't have the big picture dreams. He can't think bigger. And Rameir Simcha had this tremendous desire, no matter whether you're Baal Kishon like the Rogachover or not, but if you have this tremendous desire to dream big, to think that you can accomplish, that all of Torah is something that a person can learn, then a person can accomplish a lot more than he thinks he can. One of my Rebbeim, Rabbi Mordechai Willig Shlita, always told us that the Vilna Gaon is known as the Vilner Gaon, and he said it's very appropriate for Yiddish, because Vil means to want and Nor means more, it means just rather. So he says Vilner, he just wanted. How do you become a Vilna Gaon? By just wanting, by wanting to be great, by wanting to master Kol Torah Kula. So when it comes to the four Lashonos of Geula, it could be that before Kodesh Baruch Hu could do anything for us, the first Lashon of Geula means, the first issue that Kodesh Baruch Hu had to contend with was that we were in a slave mentality. We didn't even know what it means to want freedom. We didn't even know what it means to experience freedom, to dream about freedom, to imagine a better life for ourselves. So the first issue HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to contend with is that the Jewish people, for all the servitude and persecution, we were at home in Mitzrayim. We sort of accepted it. This is our life. This is what we do. This is how we go about our day. To be sovel something means to tolerate something. And that's the problem with the Jew in Galus. It's not that, we're not learning enough, it's that we're sovel Galus. We tolerate Galus. We're sovel our situation. We just don't think beyond our situation. We don't have any desire for something more. We make little efforts to change to change our situation, because ultimately we don't want to really change it. We don't think about really changing it. So Hashem that was the first Lashon Geula. He first had to take the Jewish people out of Sivlos Mitzrayim, out of tolerating Mitzrayim. He had to be Me'ashpos Yarim Evyon. He had to teach us to dream bigger. When Moshe Rabbeinu first rallies up the people to believe in his mission and he approaches Paro, the servitude continues. But this time the people get angry at Moshe. Now that says something. They've learned to aspire to more. That was the first step of Geula. Suddenly, that same servitude that they've been experiencing for generations doesn't seem so tolerable to them. It's not something they're willing to put up with. And that was the critical first step of Geula. So the message that you see from here is that if a person is able to think big picture, think beyond where we are right now, we can accomplish a great deal. We're going to talk today in this show about very lofty goals in Talmud Torah. We're going to talk about being Malik Kreso, with Shas and Poskim, about a person gaining a mastery of Shas and Poskim to the point that he wants to and needs to appreciate a more direct link with HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the Torah Kedosha and even beyond through Torah Hanistar. And we think to ourselves, how could we possibly aspire to such things? It's so hard. We work every day, and it's just so hard to just make a living and to find time to learn anything, to just find time to learn a Daf Yomi, to learn something. But it's kedai for a person to never lose that aspiration, the aspiration for godless. Now, whatever our learning schedule is, it should always, we can always do more. We can always aspire for more. We can always aspire for a sense of Yediyas HaTorah, to really gain knowledge of the Torah. And we have people to look to as our aspirations. We have Rabbonim and Rosh Yeshiva, and not only Rabbonim and Rosh Yeshiva, we have Balabatim who are learning a tremendous amount. I'm not just saying this because it's his show, but David Lichtenstein works very, very hard for a living. He's very successful and has a very, very demanding job, demanding business. But is that an excuse not to learn seriously in the morning and at night? Is that an excuse not to write Svarim? Is that an excuse not to be Marbitz Torah to tens of thousands of people? No, you can always do more. We can always dream bigger. We can always accomplish more. So the spirit of this show tonight should not be about feeling that we're so small. It should be that we feel big, that we feel that we can aspire. We can aspire to a greater knowledge of Torah. We can aspire to greater dedication in Talmud Torah. And we're going to talk to two really wonderful Talmidei Chachamim who each have their perspective about how to accomplish in Torah learning and ultimately what it's all about in a relationship with the Ribbon Shalom, in coming close to the Ribbon Shalom. And if we're able to gain some inspiration to come closer to the Ribbon Shalom through his Torah and through the various elements of his Torah, then we've accomplished a great deal indeed. So without further ado, let's get on with the show. We're very honored to have with us Rav Moshe Weinberger, the Rav of Aish Kodesh in Woodmere. Rav Weinberger is a very well-known, world-renowned personality, but we specifically want to talk to him today about Talmud Torah and different elements of Talmud Torah, and also about how people can continue to strive in Torah, to grow in Avodas Hashem throughout their entire lives. Rav Weinberger is known as someone who has taught Chassidus to many, many thousands of people, but even more than that, as someone who lives near Rav Weinberger in the Woodmere area, it's obvious that Rav Weinberger's great contribution, one of his great contributions to Klal Yisrael, is that he took a community where the norm was that a rabbi's job is to officiate a life cycle events, paskin shailas, and instead changed the paradigm, where a rabbi's job is to uplift people, to get them to steig and to grow in Avodas Hashem. So we're going to try to pick his brain a little bit in terms of how to get people to do that, but particularly through different areas of Talmud Torah. So welcome, Rav Weinberger.
Thank you very much.
Rav Weinberger, it's well known that you are a great advocate for learning Pnimiyus HaTorah. So that the term is thrown around a lot, but a lot of people aren't sure exactly what that is and why it's so important, and whether it's absolutely essential or just something for people who maybe are otherwise struggling. Can you elaborate on just the definition of Pnimiyus HaTorah and who should be learning it?
Well, I think the simplest explanation of Pnimiyus HaTorah, it's a very broad term. You're right, it's often misused and abused, and it's used often as an excuse not to learn regular Torah. Pnimiyus HaTorah means, and very simply, that the same way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Moshe Rabbeinu Niglas HaTorah, the revealed Torah, to tell us exactly how to put on tefillin and how to keep Shabbos and so on, HaKadosh Baruch Hu also revealed to Moshe Rabbeinu how we are supposed to observe what the Rishonim referred to as Chayvus Alavavus, the mitzvah of Ahavas Hashem. What does it mean to love God? What does it mean to fear God? What is the essence and the nature of belief? There are mitzvahs of the mind and there are mitzvahs of the heart, which the Kadmonim have taught us are the tachlis of all the Tayag mitzvahs, is to achieve a state of Dveikus B'Hashem. And Pnimiyus is that world that guides us in the observance of mitzvahs hamayach and mitzvahs halev, the mitzvahs of the mind and of the heart, and to be able to become dabuk to Hashem. Hashem gave to Moshe Rabbeinu guidelines as far as how we're to be able to achieve Dveikus B'Hashem, which is the tachlis of our lives. That, in a very, very simple way, is the inyan of Pnimiyus HaTorah. As far as it being something which is necessary or required, or is it only for certain people, for special people? Well, the Zohar Kodesh tells us that that when Bnei Yisrael received the Torah, Chazal tell us in explaining the pasuk that we were afraid after we heard Anochi Lo Yilecha, we asked Moshe Rabbeinu to intercede and to be a mediator, to be able to receive and to give over the rest of the Torah to us, and not to receive it directly from Hashem. And the Zohar Kodesh says that this was explains that this was a mistake on the part of Bnei Yisrael. Those neshamas that demanded and that were begging to hear from Hashem Himself, those are the neshamas that can't live without Pnimius HaTorah. And there were other Jews that were satisfied hearing it through Moshe Rabbeinu, not directly from Hashem. Those are Jews who believe that they're able to survive as Jews without Pnimius HaTorah. It's a very interesting chiddush from the Zohar Kodesh, because essentially there are two makaros of Amunah, there are two sources of faith. There is a Jew whose faith is sustained, is strengthened through Hashemayim Esabim Kvod Kel, looking at the world and observing halacha and so on. And the other source of faith is Baruch Nafshi Es Hashem, a person coming more into contact with who he really is and what his neshama is. And therefore there are Jews who feel that it's not something that they have to have in their lives, and they can go on being wonderful observant Jews without Pnimius HaTorah. There are other Jews who feel a tremendous natural longing and need to connect on a deeper level. That's just the nature of different people.
Are there any pitfalls? Meaning, is there any danger? It seems that it makes a lot of people uneasy when younger people are learning Pnimius HaTorah, and the Shach says not to learn Kabbalah till the person is 40 years old. So, and it's hard to sometimes draw the line. Even I realize I'm asking a lot of questions right now, but like you open a Noam Elimelech, and like if you have no grounding in Kabbalah at all, it's very difficult to understand. So, are there particular svarim that one should wait to learn? Other svarim that if a person feels this yearning, he can learn at a younger age? Is the age even still a factor?
So, it's an interesting thing. The Shach and the age of 40, that there are Jews who never heard of Muktzah, but somehow they heard of that Shach. It's interesting. The truth is that's not the universally accepted age. There was once a great tzaddik who I'm sure that most of the audience heard of. He's called the Ramak, Ramosha Cordovero, and probably most of the audience are students of the Sefer Torah Devorah. So the Ramak also wrote a Sefer called Or Ne'erav. And that Or Ne'erav is basically discussing the conditions that are, a Sefer that discusses the conditions that are required of a person who wants to learn the inner world of Torah, who wants to learn Pnimius HaTorah. And the other Ramak doesn't even consider the issue of the age 40. He discusses the age of 20, half of the age of 40, which is the time of Bina. And in our generation, the great Mekubal, who's universally respected and loved, Rabbi Yitzchak Kaduri, said that he spoke about any marriage person that knows the basic halachas and is able to make a learning to learn a Blat Gemara should be kavei itim, not should be, but must be kavei itim, to set aside time in his life to learn Pnimius HaTorah. Now, are there pitfalls? Of course there are pitfalls. There are pitfalls, particularly with people who are not grounded in halacha, who are not learning Mishnayos and Gemara and Shulchan Aruch and Mishnah Berurah. There's no question that there could be major pitfalls, and there are certainly individuals who are emotionally unbalanced that are naturally going to be more attracted to this limud and could be very, very much hurt by it. It's not that somebody opens up the Zohar Kodesh and goes crazy, like we were told when we were kids, but they simply will misunderstand it and misinterpret, and they will make that into the basis of their Avodas Hashem, when in fact the person who's missing the basar lechem, the lechem basar of Yiddishkeit, and doesn't have that basis in kiyum mitzvahs and in learning, could just terribly misinterpret and misunderstand what he's studying. That doesn't in any way deny the need for this limud. There's no question that it's necessary. We're living now before Mashiach comes, And the Navi Yeshaya said, "V'nasat lechem leiv chadash, v'ruach chadasha eitein b'kirbechem." And we're living at this time where, unless a person, it doesn't have to be Kabbalah. I never advocate the study of Kabbalah unless we're dealing with individuals who are already advanced students. We're talking about learning. Pneumius also includes learning Michtav Mi'elio, learning Machshava, learning the Shiurim of Moshe Shapira, learning Rab Shamshin Pincus. But a limud that is a limud of depth. It's lav davka Chassidus, but it's a limud that is speaking to the Leiv Chadash, the new heart that our generation is begging for, demanding. We're living in a time of a hishlachti rav baris. There's a tremendous hunger for Torah. There's a tremendous hunger for Torah. L'shmo Dvar Hashem, and that Torah of Dvar Hashem, Rav Moshe David Vali, the Ramchal's great student, asked, why would there be, in his parish on Amos, on that pasuk, he asked, why would there be a hunger for the Dvar Hashem? There are millions of svarim. Any person can go to the library, to the svarim store, and just go to his own svarim shrank, and there's plenty what to learn. Why would anybody be? Why would there be a famine? Why would there be any hunger when it comes to Dvar Hashem? So Moshe David Vali said, because not all aspects of Torah, not everything that you learn in Torah addresses that need or that feeling that a Jew has to connect to Hashem. Not all the Svarim do that. He says, as a matter of fact, there are very few that speak directly to the heart of a person who is longing to have a connection to Kodesh Baruch Hu. So there is a hunger before Mashiach comes that needs to be addressed. We're now Erev Shabbos. The Svarim tell us, based upon the Ramban in Bereshis, that we're now holding by Erev Shabbos before Mashiach comes. And I know many Jews who are medaktek, even though they might not so be medaktek in other mitzvahs, when it comes to the custom of Te'emeh Chaim Zochu that's brought down in the Machzor Vitri in the name of the Yerushalmi, that a person should taste of the food of Shabbos and Erev Shabbos. So we're waiting. We're now holding Otot. It's going to be Shabbos, and it's Erev Shabbos, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us, and we feel that intuitively, that there's a need to taste from the macholim of Shabbos, of Toimei Chaim Zachu, of Netzach Chaim. And that's why we see that right before the Elef HaShishi, right before Erev Shabbos, that the Zohar Kodesh was revealed, and then later on the Torah of the Arizal and the Rashash, the Ramchal, the Baal Shem Tov, and the Vilna Gaon, because the Rambam says in Hilchas Malachim that what's the Yemaisa Mashiach, that Oz lo yeh Eisa Ka'olim elo das Hashem bilvad, that the whole inyan of Mashiach is that we're going to be Isaac in Das Hashem, and the Tanya writes in the Gersa Kodesh that the Iker Isaac of Torah, when Mashiach comes, is going to be Pnimius HaMitzvahs, the Tameim and the Storm, to learn Pnimius HaTorah. That's the Iker Isaac of Torah that's going to be when Mashiach comes. It's in the Gersa Kodesh Per Chavav. So we have to make hachanas for that, and we have to prepare for that. But it has to be done in an intelligent, healthy, and balanced way with the hadracha of Talmidei Chachamim who are very, very learned in this area.
If you have a guy, for example, who went to Litvish yeshivas his whole life, so he probably learned a little bit of Rav Dessler, probably even a little Nefesh HaChaim, but never really threw himself into really fully understanding or trying to plumb the depths in this kind of way. What are the starting points? Like what svarim would you recommend that he begin with to begin to understand?
Okay, that's a very important practical question. You know, let me first mention, since you said you were the one that brought up our Litvisher brothers, so let me just mention two wonderful and holy Litvaks that we all respect, Rabbi Chanan Wasserman and the Baal HaLeshem, Rabbi Yoshua's grandfather. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman said that the sherish of Kvira, he says this in the Kavitz Mamarim, that the sherish of heresy is that people think that they don't have to have a relationship with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, that they could just keep mitzvahs and learn Torah without developing a relationship with Hashem. That's the sherish of kfira. So the fact that a person's already, that someone that grew up in the Litvish yeshivas is looking for something more, again, it doesn't have to be Chassidus, that already means that he's in the higher percentile of Jews that understands that he has to develop a relationship with Hashem. The Leshem said that you find that there are people that say that ainli asik ben nistaros, ainli asik ben nistaros. And he said, Ein bezeh klum. A person who says that I have no shaykhis to Pnimius Torah, he says, Ein bezeh klum. The Vilna Gaon is brought in the name of the Vilna Gaon, that a person who doesn't understand Sod, then even the pshat, of simple pshat and pasuk, and in Gemara he doesn't understand. So where does one begin?
Is it possible if I just any asek b'nestaros? I mean, that's a common term used in poskim. Rabbi Yehuda writes any asek b'nestaros.
Yes.
Might he mean something else? Then I just have no.
Yeah. The answer to that question is that when the Rabbi Yehuda said, what I have seen in my learning, including that piece from Rabbi Yehuda on the Indian of L'Shem Yichud, when the Kadmonim used that term, ainly asik b'nistaros, each one of tried to find one of the Kadmonim who said that didn't have a huge asik b'nistaros. The Rabbi Yehuda had a tremendous asik b'nistaros. What they were talking about is avoiding any confusion between halacha and Kabbalah in determining a shaila that's essentially a halachic shaila. And that's something that Chassam Sofer was very strong about, not mixing the two. The Chassam Sofer called them Kalayim. That's a different issue. But when you find a Jew nowadays who says ainli esik ben nistaros as a way of defending his ignorance of Pnimius Torah, then that's just the Leshem is saying that that's just a mistake, and that's amaratis. That's just ignorance. And the Vilna Gaon wasn't saying such a thing, and neither was the Leshem and those who go in the way of the Vilna Gaon. But the question
I saw an interview with Rav Aaron Lichtenstein Zichrono Livracha, where someone asked him, "Do you learn Zohar?" And he says, "Yeah, the Zohar is enthralling." And he said, "But I have to tell you, the truth is, most of my knowledge of Kabbalah is what I was able to pick up from my father-in-law, from Rav Yoshe Ber." So sometimes, people think as like the prototypical, Litvak brisker, and they think that they don't have any asek, but clearly they do on some level.
100%. You know that when it came time to establish the Yeshiva Shari Shemayim in Yerushalayim, which is Kabbalah Yeshiva, that was established by Reb Chaim Leib Auerbach, Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's father. Reb Shlomo Zalman was the Nasi of that yeshiva for 40 years. And how it was established is a remarkable story, but basically Reb Chaim Leib Auerbach and another tzaddik had a dream that such a yeshiva that they saw the Arizal in their dream who was asking how could it be that you're sitting there in Yerushalayim and no one is learning the limit of Pnimis. Rochem Levakal Baneh Me'anuli Nachim Keinenu. Mashiach's not coming because Talmid Chachamim in Yerushalayim are not learning Pnimis Torah, and they went to ask from different Gedolim Meshayla. In Europe, they decided they wanted to open such a yeshiva for Kabbalah, but they were afraid to do it without asking two of the Gedolim in Europe. They sent a letter to Reb Chaim Brisker and to the Chelkas Yoyev, one of the Avnei Nez's greatest students in Poland. And both Reb Chaim Brisker and the Chelkas Yoyev not only encouraged it, but told them that they have to work on it to start immediately to open such a yeshiva. It's a very big misrepresentation of history. Everybody knows that the Vilna Gaon's greatest Talmidim, especially Reb Chaim Volozhiner, were all very, very great in Kabbalah. As far as where should such a person begin, who was raised in the yeshivas without any familiarity, so look, the Minchas Elazar wrote in his Shuvas in the first chelik, I think it's Siman Nun, I don't know, Memtes or Nun, but the Minchas Elazar writes over there that if one's seeking to begin, I mean, again, we're talking about a person who learned halacha and is fully observant of halacha, and if somebody wants to begin to enter into the world of Pnimius Torah, the Minchas Elazar writes that he should begin with the Shari Aryeh. The Shari Aryeh is a very basic introduction from Rabbi Yosef Jektila, an introduction to from one of the Kadmonim to the world of the Midas of Hashem, the spheres of Hashem. But in our times, there are unbelievably useful svarim that are much easier to understand and would probably be more beneficial for a beginner. For instance, there's a sefer called Sifsei Chaim by Reb Shmuel Kreuz, who I think worked in a kitchen in Williamsburg, if I'm not mistaken. So he passed away a few years ago. He has written a number of svarim, but his first sefer, Sifsei Chaim, is a fantastic Hagdama to the world of Pnimius Torah and Chassidus. You have the Hagdamas of the Baal HaLeshem. The Baal HaLeshem has a whole volume of Hagdomis. It's difficult, but it's an introduction. You have the Piazetzner wrote a sefer, a chelik of the Haksharos Avreichem from the author of the Chavis HaTalmidim. It's called Mavai HaSha'arim, which is basically an introduction to Pnimius HaTorah. And then you have Reb Daniel Frisch, who is the author of the translation of the Zohar Kodesh Mosik Midvash. He has also an Aish Chaim on Kisveheri. But again, each person is different. And I know that when I began learning, I started before I ever touched the Zohar Kodesh, before I ever touched any of the Kabbalah Sfarim. I really spent years learning Maharal and Ramchal. I learned the Sfarim of the Maharal and Ramchal as a way to enter into that world of Pnimius, and that's something that I felt for me helped me a great deal. And each person, I think if a person learns a lot, this Sfarim of the Ramchal, Derech Hashem, and Das Tunis, again, these are all hakdamas. These are all hakdamas to the world of Pnimius, but each person has to find his own Pesach.
To what extent does a person's Mesorah of his Rebbeim, his family, determine what he should be learning? Or, also you see a lot of times, and this is a different issue, but an entirely different mode of dress from, and style from his parents and his Rebbeim. Is that, let's stick with the learning, I guess. To what extent does a person's own Mesorah and own, what his Rebbeim taught him and the way his parents and his grandparents learned affect what he should be learning, if at all?
Yeah. Look, it definitely should affect. It's a misgeres. It's a framework that a person has to respect, he has to love, and he has to return to all of the time, because it's the sharish in his family, and it's something which is obviously very important. But there's a basic klal in Chazal that is in contention with that, and it has to always be remembered. And oftentimes it's forgotten, and it's causing many, many, many young men and women to leave Yiddishkeit. And that's what the Gemara says now. And the Shevet Musa and other Kadmanim tell us that the meaning of La'olam Yilmad Adam B'Makom Shli B'Chafetz is that if there's a conflict between the way that you were taught by your parents or your grandparents, what you received in the Messiah, or the way that you heard even from your rebellion, but that's not reaching you, it's not speaking to you, it's not helping you grow closer to Kodesh Baruch Hu to be a stronger Jew. So that means that there's a shirish that's deeper inside of you that's not being addressed. And when the Gemara says, La'olam Yilmad Adam B'Makom Sheli B'Chafetz, that means that you can't ignore the Chayfetz Halev, the longing of the heart. Now, what draws you, what pulls at you? That's not talking about elementary school. You understand, Rabbi? We're not talking about kids in school, but we're talking about a mature person who's already been through the system in the yeshivas, and he's tried to acquire learning, and he's a healthy, well-balanced individual. Then he can't ignore the calling of his heart. Now, since there are many teachers, for instance, there was a young man who spoke to me around 10 years ago that he had a Tanya that was on his desk in yeshiva next to his Gemara, and he probably shouldn't have brought that into the base medrash where he was learning. But there's a very fine young man who had been learning his entire life. We're talking about somebody at that time was around 19 or 20, and the Mashgiach passed by and saw this and pushed it to the end of the table. He didn't throw it off the table, Baruch Hashem, else he might not be living anymore. But he pushed it to the end of the table, and he said, "This is not our Messiah. This is not our Messiah." So, who is he speaking on behalf of? It happens that particular Bacher does not come from the world of the Litvish yeshivas. His family, actually, the descendants from Ropshis and Sons. And when he said it's not our Messiah, what does that mean? It's not our Messiah. It's a very dangerous way of looking at things. And I would say the same thing, by the way, if there'd be a Chassidus Mashpia or Mashgiach who would move aside, the Gra and Mishlei or the Nefesh HaChaim, I would say the exact same thing. It's not. What does it mean? It's not our Mesorah. There are Svarim that have been validated and accepted by the Tzaddikim through all of the years of our existence, and if a Bocher feels that is something that speaks to him, I'm not talking about some sefer that's not part of our Mesorah, Am Yisrael's Mesorah. And if this Bocher feels a connection to Nefesh HaChaim, even though he's a Chassid, go for it. And if this Litvische fella feels a connection to Tanya and it speaks to him, go for it. That's our Mesorah. What about his parents? What about his rebellion? Always respect, always love, always to use as home base. But remember, La'olam Yilmad Adam B'Makom Shali B'Chafetz. And any parent or any Rebbe that tries to suffocate a child and tries to ignore or to force the child to ignore that Chayfetz Alev is going to find a situation which we see with many of the B'nai Yeshivas from all different yeshivas, that they're now looking for love in all of the wrong places. They're looking for the Rabbonim Shalom not in the Tanya, but they're looking in all kinds of weird groups or so-called Mashpia that are misrepresenting Yiddishkeit. They'll try to find it someplace else. Instead of the Rebbe acknowledging that it might not be my Mesorah, but it's something which is very holy, it's something which is very great, and that the boy should get proper hadracha from somebody that could help him to understand that sefer. Instead, the Rebbe says that's not our Mesorah, it's not his Mesorah maybe. And by the way, many of these Rebbeim would probably do also well if they took a little bit of a taste of what's offered elsewhere. But that's not here, that's not for now. But for that Bocher, it may be his Mesorah, it might not be your Mesorah. And we have to be open to that.
Moving just a few years later, the Bacher is now Balabas, and he's working very hard for a living, and he finds that there's a very small window of time, much smaller than he would like, where he's able to sit and learn. So when it comes to prioritizing learning, how does one go about prioritizing the different elements in terms of Shas, in terms of Shulchan Aruch, being Mavir Sedra, Pnimiyas Torah, Musar, Hashkafa? How does one go about figuring out the proper balance? If I could just add, especially if he really feels that Pnimiyas Torah talks to him more, so he has more of a yearning to spend more time on that.
Yeah. Look, it's very hard to say in response to this question, a klal. It's very hard to say a klal, an ironclad principle, a mahalach. Generally speaking, lichatchila, there's no question that the significant majority, I would even say the vast majority of a balabas's time should be spent learning Shas and Poskim. That is the, as I said, that's the lechem and basar of the diet of a Jew, and that should be the majority of one's time. However, the Svarim do say that if there's a person, this the Shevet Musa talks about and others, that if there's a person who simply cannot find himself, he's tried everything and he's not succeeding in his limudim of nigla. Again, he must always know the halacha and learn halacha. And even within nigla, there are those who are more drawn to halacha. There are those who are more drawn to bekiyas, more to iyon, and each person has to find himself. And if this person feels that pnimius is something that it connects him much more deeply to being a better Jew, it changes his davening, it energizes his shmiras and mitzvahs, then we do find that tzaddikim say that he could even spend most of his time learning that, as long as he's always careful with halacha. Look, there's a psak din in the Shulchan Harav. I think the entire listening audience is maskim that the Baal Tanya was a big Talmud Chacham and was a posek. The Mishnah Berurah brings him down almost every page. So the Rav says in the first parak of Hilchos Talmud Torah Halacha Dalet, the Rav says that kol nefesh tzvicha letikuna lasik bepardes k'fi mashehi achoyla lahasik v'leida, which means that every Jewish soul must, at the end of the day, must learn all four sections, Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod, through the course of his lifetime or lifetimes here in this world. And therefore, Tanya says over there that if a person ignores this, he has to return. Then he has to return another time to this world to order to be masig the Torah completely. That means that really each one of us is assigned to learn Kol Torah Kula. Kol Torah Kula means nigla and nister. It means everything, not just one part of Torah. Everything, all of Shas, all of Poskim, Medrash, Zoya, Kisveri, everything. We don't always accomplish that in one Gilgul, and the Tanya says that, and he brings this, of course, this is based upon the Kisveri and the Zohar Kodesh, that one then has to return to the world in order for his neshama to be masig, midiyas HaTorah, what it has to be masig. So, is there such a thing that you have a person who might have been extraordinarily accomplished and did what he had to in Nigla, in Shulchan Aruch, and Shas, and earlier Gilgul, and now he's here to be mashlim, that part of Torah that he perhaps was ignored or was not really connecting to in an earlier Gilgul? According to the Baal Tanya and other great tzaddikim, including the Ramchal and the Gra and others, yes, that's true. And I believe in that 1,000,000%, that there are certain Jews that they simply need to indulge more in Pnimis HaTorah. But again, I repeat, because I'm often misquoted in this way or misrepresented, that I repeat, that does not mean ever, chas v'sholem, to ignore nigla or chas v'sholem, to make any compromises when it comes to observance of halacha and respect for halacha, and making sure that a person always has part of his day that's being used for learning nigla. Absolutely.
Right. I think a lot of people don't realize that Rebbe, I don't know if Rebbe still does, but he used to give a shir on Choshen Mishpat every single morning, and it was obviously very, very, you don't need me to say, but very, very well done.
Let me just say something. I could say proudly, not only that we learned Choshen Mishpat for 7 years, we learned Choshen Mishpat, but in our shul in Aish Kodesh, every single year we make a siyum on Talmud Bavli. Besides that, there are many individuals who are learning Yerushalmi, but the shul makes a siyum. Already, we've been doing this for the past 10 years on the entire Shas. It means that we divide Mesechtes, not just Prokim, Mesechtes among the whole Chevra, myself included, and every single year we make a siyum on Talmud Bavli, and there are others who are doing that with the Yerushalmi. And the women in the shul over the years have been finishing Tanakh every year. So every single day we begin with a strong nigla, and that's again the meat and the bread. That's the basis of our base medrash as well.
I'm glad Rabbi mentioned women, because I wanted to ask how you would advise women differently than men in terms of Torah Sanistar, in terms of the Pnimius HaTorah.
Look, if you look at the Rambam in Yesodei HaTorah, when he speaks about Pardes HaTorah, so the Rambam doesn't exclude women from Pardes, and again, we could discuss a different time what the Rambam's definition of Pardes was, but he does not exclude women from Limud Pardes, and they are included in the mitzvah. All the mitzvahs of Chayvus Alavavis, women are obligated in. That means Ahavas Hashem, Yiras Hashem, Emunah B'Hashem, Dveikus B'Hashem. Women are obligated in all of these mitzvahs just like men. Therefore, there's no question that they should be learning in a healthy way. They should be learning Pnimis HaTorah as well. But since they have less background, for the most part, again, I don't want to get in trouble, but for the most part, they have much less background in learning Shas and Poskim. Therefore, much greater care needs to be taken how they're learning, and it needs to be in consultation with the Gedolei HaTorah how a woman is to go about with her limud, with learning Pnimis HaTorah. The Tanya, for instance, to learn Tanya, to learn Nefesh HaChaim, those are two svarim which share a great deal in common, and the two svarim that everybody could begin to learn Be'iyun and is Davar Hashav L'chol Nefesh. But again, it has to be with proper guidance. But women are certainly obligated to learn Pnimis HaTorah as well.
If I could just switch over from Talmud Torah to, I think it's a related topic, and it's a little more personal to my experience a little bit north of Aish Kodesh. For people who don't know, who may be listening, anyone who visits the five towns wants to always daven Kabbalah Shabbos Aish Kodesh, because it's just an uplifting experience, and it's something that really energizes a person, and a person very often walks away feeling much closer to the Ribbon Shalom. So sometimes the hashpa'ah spills over, as you would hope it would, to neighboring areas. So particularly over Yom Noraim in my shul, we had an experience where our shul is under construction, so just the whole atmosphere was different. We had a tent in someone's backyard. It had like a very Uman kind of feel to it. I don't know I'm not speaking from experience there, but just felt different. And there was just this incredible energy. Every tefillah with just a lot of singing, a tremendous rikud at the end of every tefillah or during even, and it was just tremendous energy. And a number of people who I think are very well-meaning and legitimately concerned said, this was nice. You had a nice time to play over here over Yom Noraim, but I hope we can get back to real serious tefillah where we can make sure that we hear every single word of Kaddish, and where the decorum is going to be more in line with what we're used to. So, I mean, how does one balance? And I hear their concerns. I mean, how does one balance the necessity of an uplifting experience? I think people need it. They're dying for it. People need to be uplifted. The days of fear and awe and just everything being a scare tactic, I think it's just not going to work anymore. People just walk away. So how does one balance that with the need to also hear every word of Kaddish and to have more, I guess, traditional decorum during tefillah?
Look, it's a very big question, and it depends a lot on who the leader is of that tzibur. Decorum. Let me put it this way: if this is taking place, if this great new exciting davening suddenly is taking place somewhere where there's a culture, an old culture, where there's a lack of decorum, which means they might have traditional quiet type of davening, but it comes with talking during davening, which is really a halachic lack of decorum, and other things such as a kiddush club, v'chulu, where people to begin with are behaving as children by talking in shul and having to run down for a l'chaim in the middle of laning or something. So then, when you're trying to establish in that place, you let go of the stoppers and you unleash a new type of davening. So it's most likely you're going to have immature and lack of decorum, and you won't be able to hear Kaddish properly and so on. But if the culture of the shul is a culture of dignity and respect and careful observance of halacha, and people who know when it's time to sing a niggin, and there's a leader who says ad kan, and he turns around and says maspik, and then it immediately returns to that decorum that was 2 minutes before, I don't think that you have a problem. I don't believe you had a problem with the Beis HaMikdash either, and I don't recall ever reading anything about the Levium struggling with this when they were with their Shiva. I think it's a question that reflects upon a certain sad metzias of the culture that we're living in, where either you let go, or either it's unbridled emotionalism and craziness and partying, or it's Tisha B'Av all year round. And I just don't believe in that. But if it's not going to be with mature individuals who have strong leadership, it could very well get out of control, as I've seen in different minyanim, and it's unacceptable.
So if I could just close with a comment and maybe get Rebbe's thoughts. It just struck me recently that there's a huge movement in the secular world called positive psychology. And sometimes I get an idea that sometimes we have the idea that an idea is yored b'olam, and it's just what the world needs at a particular tkufa. And it just strikes me, just as someone who deals with talmidim and chaverim who daven in my shul, that people just need a lot more positivity than they used to. Would Rabbi agree with that? Anything to add to that?
Yes, so I'll tell you, I'm giving a shir in 2 minutes. I'll just say this, that that the Vilna Gaon says in Evan Shlomo that every generation there is a different midah in each generation that is shaylay, that is ruling over that generation. One generation, one time in history could be that it's the midah of Yira, and focusing more on the faults and what needs to be corrected, and so on. And then there's another generation where the midah that is shaylay, that sholetes, is the midah of ahava, of love. And this is not a new thing. I think it's Rashi in Parshas Ve'era. We're coming up to it soon. That it says who Aaron and Moshe, and sometimes it says Moshe and Aaron. So Rashi says there, I think it's in Ve'era in Perek Vav. So Rashi says sometimes first it's Aaron, then it's Moshe, sometimes it's Moshe, then it's Aaron Melamid to teach us Sheshkulim Heim that Moshe and Aaron are equal. And now the way of Moshe Rabbeinu's Yikov Hadinis Ahar is essentially a way of Yira. The way of Aaron is essentially a way of Ahava. There's a lot to talk about this, but there's no time. It's essentially Moshe's way. I don't want to call it pessimistic, but it's generally a way of Yira. The way of Aaron is primarily a way of Ahava. You need both Ahava and Yira. The question is, what generation requires more at what time, and when is Ahava the main, and when is Yira the main? So generally speaking, if you ask which was first, Aaron was born. He's 3 years older than Moshe Rabbeinu, and that means that critiquing or more of a strong-handed, pessimistic orientation, let's say, using that as a model, that can only work when there's somebody like Aaron, where the basis of one's Yiddishkeit and the basis of one's Avodas Hashem is with a strong feeling of unconditional love. They're both necessary. That's how Hashem runs the world, as Avinu Malkeinu, as our Father and our King. We need both of them. But in our generation, there's no question that there needs to be a very strong emphasis on Ahava, that the students and kids and adults have to feel that at the very, very core, there's that love of the mother, and then they could receive more of the discipline of the father. But if the mother's love is going to disappear or going to be much less, then the father's teaching, the father's way of teaching, is we see more and more is not being heard. So it's our generation, for whatever reason, it's not important to go into it right now. Our generation needs much more of the positive, and it's really what works. Not everybody needs that, but the overwhelming majority of people need much more of that than they did in the past, and we have to be attuned to and adjust ourselves, like the Vilna Gaon says, to that reality that we're living in.
Okay, thank you very much, Weinberger. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I think this was extremely important and enlightening for me, certainly, and I'm sure for everybody else as well.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. Okay, Culture.
Bye-bye. We'd like to welcome to the program Rabbi Roberts, who's a Rav in England, and we thank him for taking time to join us on the program this week, where we're going to be talking about learning Torah Hanistar and Chassidus and what its role should be in the life of a Ben Torah and a Balabas. So if I could just ask Rabbi Roberts, you live in England on the other side of the pond, and many of us may not be familiar with you or where you're a Rav, where you learned. If you could just introduce yourself for a moment.
Thank you very much indeed. Shalom Aleichem, and thank you for the honor, the privilege to share some Divrei Torah with you. So my name is David Roberts. I'm from Gateshead. Although I wasn't born there, I was born a few miles away in a little place called Sunderland, but I've lived most of my adult life in Gateshead, went through the Yeshiva system there, Yeshiva Ketana, Yeshiva Gedola, then went on to Brisk, and straight after I got married, I spent 13 years in a little place called Gibraltar, in the southern tip of Spain, a British colony where I was an avrich of the Kollel and was involved in chinuch and ran high school, and that was until 2001. And since then I've been here in London, actually in a suburb of northwest London called Edgeware, where I have had the privilege of being the Rav of a Kehillah called Netzach Yisroel, as well as continuing to be involved in chinuch and various other things.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you for joining us. So it seems that your Litvisha credentials are pretty strong.
Thank you. I hope so.
Okay. So first, in recent years, it's become popular, even in many Litvisha communities, certainly here in the United States, to learn Sifrei Chassidus and to have a little bit more of an emphasis on Kabbalah than, even though obviously many Litvish Gedolim obviously were very well versed in Kabbalah, but it wasn't always accepted for other people and for younger people, but it's become more of a thing to do. So is this a positive development in your view, a negative development, or something that has both positive and negative, if you can comment on that?
Thank you very much indeed. That's a very penetrative question. So if I may actually, if you don't mind, perhaps provide a bit of a high-level overarching hakdama to the assumptions that are in your question. You depict a reality, one which I think any Ben Torah is familiar with. Sfasemes and Reb Tzadok HaKohen and others, and Shem Mishmuel, form the library of many a Litvische Ben Torah, and they, without a shadow of a doubt, have given us so much depth and clarity in so many areas of Torah that it's unquestioned, and indeed so it should be. But perhaps, I think, if we can take a step back for a second, and I'd like to go off-piste just for a couple of minutes, but then bring it right back, because there's something that I've observed over the years, which I think perhaps is relevant here. A few years ago, I bought a book called Darkei Hashgacha, The Paths of Providence, written by somebody called Chaim Gross. I don't know who that is. It's a really interesting book, and he points out, it's quite scholarly, and there's a lot of very good Maramakomas, and he points out what is a very true and fascinating question, which is that if we look through the works of the Rishonim, the Rambam, even the Ramban, and the Sforno, and other Gedolei HaRishonim seem to have had although there was never quite consensus, but they seem to have had a broad idea in terms of hashgacha and the way, the oversight and the involvement that the Rabbeinu Shalom has with the world. And although I said Ramban, and everybody, of course, thinks immediately of the Ramban, Sof Parshas Boi, Ein Adam Chelik B'Toras Moshe Rabbeinu Ad Shenamin, that everything is a nes, Ein Beim Teva V'Shel Olam Klal. However, people forget the Ramban in Eov, and where he seems to say that even tzaddikim, I mean, I can quote, I just took it out myself before. He says, "Kfi kirvosoi lihidovik beilei kovi shtam eshmira mu'ula, v'horochik min ha'il b'machshavte b'maisa, v'afilu lo yischayev misa b'chetei ha'shechota, that somebody who, even though perhaps is not chayav misa as such, but if somebody's not dovuk in his machshav and maisim in the Rabbeinu Shalom, he can be, quote unquote, meshulach v'ne'ezav li'mekarim, which translates as being abandoned. And then we find a very interesting thing, what this Chaim Gross calls an 18th century revolution, where the pendulum swings back. And it's fascinating to note that one of the very few things that the Talmidei Hagra and the Talmidei Habesht agree on is the notion of what he calls, and perhaps it's a good way to describe it, is absolute hashgacha, to the point that that today this is very much the accepted norm. You pick up any classic hashkafic work such as Michtav Melio, Reb Chaim Friedlander, and this is the line. This is very much the party line, and this, no doubt, there's no question that it is that it's Makori and it's right. But the question is, what happened, and why, and
what's the difference between absolute hashgacha versus what was?
So it's probably not for a soundbite. It's a massive, massive topic, and I'll give you an example. An example would be, people may be familiar with, there's a very beautiful song from Yom Tov Elech, which is based on something that's brought in some of the Ksavim of the Talmidei Habesht. The song De Bletzela. That the leaf and the fellow asks the Malach, why did the leaf fall from the tree, and he goes and he asks the wind, and it comes back, the answer is because there's a little worm at the bottom of the tree, and the sun was hurting this worm, and Mimela, the Rabbeinu Shalom at Gehason, the Malach of the wind should blow and the leaf should fall, und der Veremel schloft sich. It's a very beautiful, and it comes directly from the Ksavim, the Talmidei Habesht. It is the very same example that both the Rambam and the Ramban says that if anybody believes that, don't know how to finish the sentence. The quote, anybody can find it and look it up, both in Monavuchim and in Ramban, that they say that's not appropriate, it's not correct. It's as simple as that. So, without going further into all of the details, and people can go away and look up all the Makoros, but I think there's something going on over here, because of course, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim. And I think this is perhaps something that, although in this book he focuses very much on the rationale, and he brings in Spinoza and all sorts of things which are very interesting and may well be correct, but if I may suggest, there's something else going on over here, and that is, if to coin a phrase, and I don't mean to be clever for the sake of it, is that there is hashgacha on hashgacha. Dahainu, that, and this is something I heard from my then Rebbe Matthew Salomon Shlita many years ago in Gateshead, that the Ramchal writes, I mean, he wrote a whole sefer called Das Tavunos to explain that the Rabbeinu Shalom runs the world on two parallel lines, Hanhogas HaYichud and Hanhogas HaMishpat. Hanhogas HaMishpat is a reciprocal relationship. It's one where there are causal links between actions and outcomes, schar v'onesh. And at the very same time, there is something else operating in parallel lines called Hanhogas HaYichud, which is either because of or despite our actions. Umevi goye livnei v'neim, in the present tense, everything that happens, every single split second, we are inching inexorably closer to the Geula, and the two operate in tandem. There was a time, says the Ramchal, where Hanhogas HaMishpat was predominant. And it was a question of being able to discern, because the point is, of course, midah k'neged midah, the point of that is so that we can have a meaningful relationship with a Borei Olam that is intangible, and that's why we have midah k'neged midah, so that we should understand what we've done wrong and be mesaken our maisim. But then, as the Ramchal writes, and Matzio then said it in the context of tzoros and suffering, and I believe he's repeated it a number of times since, that as the Rabbeinu Shalom ties together the threads, so to speak, in the years or decades just before, or centuries perhaps even, as Moshe is about to come, where we're working towards Vayom Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad, then in the settling of accounts, the operative modality is that of Mazel Elyon or Hanhogas HaYichud, which means, therefore, that in terms of Hashgacha, the idea that there is absolute accountability, even though we don't see it, because we're living in such difficult times, there is so much tzoros, that v'tzadik be'emunasa yichya, b'seif hayomim b'ach habakik be'midun alachas, v'tzadik be'emunasa yichya means that we see and we observe perhaps and perceive less the link between those who are good and what happens to them, and therefore that becomes more necessary. And therefore, without a shadow of a doubt, there is hashgacha on hashgacha, that it should be reinforced in Klal Yisrael, starting from that point in time, both from the Talmidei Hagron, the Talmidei Habesh, to the point that today this is the norm, this is the normative understanding of hashgacha, that, of course, those Rishonim were right. But what the Rabbeinu Shalom clearly, I think, wants us to be able to relate to him in these times before the coming of Mashiach is the Hanhogas HaYichud. And as part of that, I think this ties in, and I haven't forgotten your original question, I'm sorry, but I think it ties in very much, because then the Sifrei Chassidus and the Sifrei Kabbalah, and maybe I know you want to ask more about Kabbalah later, very much, I think, tie into this. The idea that we're able to discern a deeper, more real, meaningful relationship with the Rabbeinu Shalom, this hybridization, for want of a better term, whereby the cross-fertilization of these Chassidish ideas based on Emunah and the relationship with the Rabbeinu Shalom is one clearly that was considered necessary, and therefore it's found its way into the Litvische Kreise, and I just have this very strong sense that is definitely what it was meant to be, and therefore, broadly speaking, it has to be a positive development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems that in today's day and age, I don't know what it was like in the past, but certainly the descriptions we have of people who would leave the fold of Yiddishkeit were usually it was some sort of misguided principle. It was some sort of corrupt emunah or corrupt level of hashkafa. But it seems that today a lot of people are just lost. They just don't feel connected in any way. And many people believe that the way to remedy that problem is through an increased emphasis on the study of Chassidus, and that will talk to someone's heart. And when it's not the mind that's straying, but it's the heart that's straying, then maybe direct conversation with the heart will be a better way to reach out to people. Is that a fair assessment? And if it's not, then what other ways do we have to sort of reach people who are just not interested? People who, I know there are people who dress from, who send their kids to yeshivas, who kill themselves to send their kids to yeshivas. They work very hard to be able to pay tuitions, but just don't really believe in anything. They just don't. There are people walking around who have and behind closed doors, they'll go on their phone on Shabbos and they'll do, because they're just disconnected from Yiddishkeit. Is Chassidus the answer, and are there other answers?
That is perhaps the question of the moment. That is, sadly, I absolutely recognize that reality even this side of the pond. They've even coined a phrase for it, I believe, orthopraxy, that people that, for whatever reason, continue to externally identify, and yet, like you say, there's nothing going on. The lights have gone out. They're not enthused. They're not energized. They're not connected to the Borei Olam, and therefore there is an appeal in terms of Chassidus, Reitzeh Hashem es Halev. And so, first of all, I think to acknowledge that reality, anybody, any mechanech, any rov, anybody who comes into contact with people on a meaningful basis will acknowledge the reality of what you are saying, and it is tragic. If I may, without wanting to be controversial, and certainly not for the sake of it, but let me just make a comment. We're seeing, and this is to some extent in broader society as well, and I certainly wouldn't dream of referring to Trump or anything that happens in terms of politics, but it does actually indicate something, and I'm going to make a conflation to something totally different. You know, when I was growing up, I'm going to talk about Breslau for a minute, because I think that's a really important marker, a way of identifying at some level what you're talking about. Because sort of when I was growing up, we knew there was such a thing called Breslau, but it was very much a small, I wouldn't even say marginalized. It just wasn't really on the agenda or in the hearts and minds of people. And if you actually stop to think, you know, you were asking me about Chassidus. I mean, one of the most iconic ideas and images that are concepts that are associated with Chassidus is that of the Rebbe. And, you know, even Lebowitz, which may be flourishing, but they had a very strong Rebbe figure until relatively recently. But think of Breslau. Their Rebbe hasn't been alive for hundreds of years, and it is enjoying a renaissance which is, to some people, the outsiders, is bewildering and stupefying. What on earth is this about? And it's a counterculture type of move. And if I think perhaps what this means is as follows. People, we're living, like you say, we're living in an incredibly fragmented society and fragile. Emotionally, people are very, very fragile. And the rise of mental health issues is a very real one. It's a real one for our Kehillas and needs to be dealt with robustly. But what it means is, like you said, people are fragmented, they're disconnected. And I have to be careful how I say this and how I tread here, but the minute that what was at one point, you know, the Baal Shem Tov reached out to the simple Yid, the Yid that perhaps wasn't a scholar and was downtrodden, but Friday night he could come and he could sit by the feet of the Rebbe and he could sing, and his soul could sing, and he could yearn and transcend and feel connected and connect to the Rabbonim Shalom that way, with simcha, with avodas Hashem, with tefillah, and that was an amazing thing. It was a beautiful thing. It wasn't institutionalized. It wasn't a power base. And it had very little to do with institutions. Today, this is a reality, not chas v'sholom, a criticism. The reality is that the large, well-organized Chassidus are institutions. They have power. They have money. There's a group identity. And the externals, the chitzonius, is incredibly important. And some people yearn for Pnim. Yiddishkeit is meant to be about Pnim. And there are many people out there who want to connect to the Ribbono Shel Olam inside out, not outside in, starting from the inside. And therefore, what you wear to these people, I mean, I can understand it. I'm not a Breslover, but I get it. I actually do understand it. If somebody feels that, yes, the Ribbono Shel Olam loves me for who I am, I'm a Ben Avram Yitzchak v'Yaakov, and without getting to what they have to do, but just being to acknowledge that and to cry out and speak to the Ribbono Shel Olam and make the Ribbono Shel Olam a reality. And this is not by any means a Breslover notion. I had the zechus of, on a number of occasions of Reb Shimshon Dovid Pinkus, the Tzadik Nevracha, visited Gibraltar when we were in Kehillas, and the impact that his presence and the way he spoke and who he was impacted my life in a very meaningful way. And he was just in love with the Ribbono Shel Olam. I don't know how else to describe it. And he would talk about talking to the Ribbono Shel Olam in a very real way. I don't think he could. He learned in brisk. He certainly was no Breslover. But that idea, people are searching for that. They're searching for real meaning, and therefore the concept of Chassidus. Interestingly, again, like I said before, the Breslovers, there is no Rebbe. It's a flat structure, to use the corporate speak, and I know they have their own difficulties. There are different factions, but leaving all of that aside, the essential idea that a Yid can have a deep and meaningful and real relationship with the Ribbono Shel Olam, despite whatever levush he is or isn't, wearing. This phenomenon of Uman, and without commenting on it any further, the sheer numbers, leaving aside any elements that may not be mainstream, shall we say. I'm just being careful how I speak, not to disparage anybody, chas v'shalom. But we have to recognize there is a real bikush out there at this point in time for people who are disenchanted with politics and power bases and people who have their own interest at heart, and they just are looking and searching for meaning, and they'll try and find it within Yiddishkeit. And we, when I say we, who am I? But we have to provide it. We have to provide it in our shuls, in our schools, as rebbes, as teachers, as parents, and give them the real sense and meaning that they can connect to the Ribbono Shel Olam. So, is Chassidus the way back? Chassidus in a lot of Chassidus in its present manifestation has become very institutionalized, and there's group identity and there's groupthink, and a lot of people are looking just for personal connection with the Ribbono Shel Olam. And
when I say Chassidus, I don't mean institutional Chassidus. That becomes affiliated with a particular Chassidus even. But that your bookshelf looks like you're looking at Pnimius HaTorah a lot more, and that you're interested in that which talks to the neshama. Even more than Shoshana Chesapara, even more than
absolutely. I mean, I would add, now that you're talking to me, I'm just remembering. I give a machshava shir on Thursday night, and we dip into different sfarim. And I've been using here's another phenomenon which I think is very indicative of this: the Bilvovi series of sfarim, which I'm sure you're familiar with. The Bilvavi Mishkan Evne, there's 10 chalokim. Some of them are in Pnimius, in Seidas HaTorah, but just the ones, he's written a 2 chalokim, which is on Mesilas Yesharim, and it just speaks in a very simple, clear, direct style, and it is wildly popular. It's the same thing to some extent, I suppose, of Reb Shimshon Pinkus's Sfarim that have become wildly popular in English, because they are just real. They are unassuming. They just speak straight to the Pnimius, to the heart of the Yid. Nesivas Shalom is another very good example of this sort of genre. So it's, in a way, it's very different to the Pri Tzadik, the Sfas Emes, the Shem Mishmuel, and certainly the Ishbitzer and others. But there is definitely a need. People, whether they're Litvish or, and it doesn't mean that they have to necessarily adopt lots of the Hasidic minhagim or practices. What they're really looking for, perhaps whether they realize it or not, is to be real and to have a very deep and meaningful Pnimius Dika connection to the Ribbono Shel Olam.
There was a controversy here, on, I don't know if it was worldwide, but certainly in one of the Jewish magazines a little while ago, a few months ago, because they did an article, I think it was Mashpia magazine, did an article about the renaissance of Chassidus, even in modern Orthodox, in the modern Orthodox world, and they had a letter was written by a Rebbe from a Yeshiva who said, it's very nice that you tell yourself that you could do whatever you want and Hashem loves you and it's happy clappy and you're dancing and you feel like you're in love with the Ribbon Shalom, but that's very damaging because you can't do whatever you want. And when Hashem's love is not unconditional, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, was his critique, and Moshe Weinberger responded, no, Hashem does love you no matter what you do, but it doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. Yeah, you still have to do Torah mitzvahs, but even if a person is in a very dark place, that Hashem does love him. So some people are very critical of, I guess, the overwhelmingly positive messages of Chassidus, because they're afraid that people will get the impression that you could do anything, and don't worry, Hashem will love you anyway. So is that a real concern, first of all? And are we worried that people won't take Torah learning seriously enough, or won't take Shmiras HaMitzvah seriously enough, if there's too much of the love and not enough of the yira?
That's a very tough one. I mean, I sometimes, even with Talmidim, I'll show them the Hakdam of the Chovos Halevavos to the Shar of Avas Hashem, where he says unequivocally that it is impossible to reach a level of Ahavas Hashem without the preceding Yira. It's mefurish. You cannot bypass that. Hakol b'dei Shamayim is chutz miyiras Shamayim. Yira comes before, Zehirus comes before Zerizos. The Sur Meirah, then Va'asei Tov. At the same time, I don't think it's binary. In other words, the concern that you have raised, I think, is a real one. It is a real one, and there are people that think, and sometimes I think it is a legitimate concern, and it does need to be expressed and put out there. There are people who think you can do whatever you want, basically. Hashem loves me, and I'm amazing, and everything's fine. And it is true, like Moshe Weinberger says, and he's very sensible. We do need, I think, it's a question perhaps of just reversing the order a bit, and I have seen in some of the Kisvei Abesh that the Talmidei Abesh that they do write this. That sometimes you need to revisit it. If I may actually come at this maybe from a slightly different angle, something I found in my experiences, without in any way chas v'shalom disparaging the wonderful work that the outreach organizations do. But imagine we had an outreach organization. I'm trying to get somebody to come to, a secular Jew, to come to my weekend seminar. And so I walk up and down the high street with a sandwich board saying, the end is nigh. Repent ye, all who come here, otherwise you're all going straight to Gehinnom. You're not going to get too many people to come. So therefore, the overwhelming marketing message, of course, always is to attract people in, and then we sell Shabbos to them on the basis of all the positives, of all the warm and fuzzy things, which are true, but sometimes I feel, and I speak as somebody who interacts with Balei Tshuva, there is follow-up work to be done, right? You've brought people in, and you've told them all the beautiful, amazing things about Yiddishkeit, and you've emphasized, or perhaps overemphasized, the Ahav side of things, but you then need to go back and actually say, Ma Hashem Elokecha shel me'imach ki im liyira. And at the bottom line, actually, although Shabbos is, yes, Zmiras and Torah and all these lovely things, but Lemaisa, it's Mina Torah at least, it's top-heavy in Lamates Malachos, Alei Saseh, and there's one Zachar Mina Torah, which, as Rabbi Kivega possibly can be answered just with Kiddush, with a quick Amira. So in a very real and strict halachic sense, it is quote-unquote more important to be very careful and particular whilst you're chapping malachim with your Zmiras and Torah and all the beautiful things. Be very careful in terms of the boirer, the fish and the bones of v'chulu v'chulu. So there is mop-up work that needs to be done afterwards, and it's not always easy. So I'm coming at this from a slightly different angle, but essentially, yes, you're absolutely right. I think there is no question that it does have its dangers, and that's why if a person strikes it out on their own, they're going to be stuck. Really, what everybody needs, ideally, is a Rebbe, a mentor, a guide, a Rav, a Chaver of mine, a Chassidus Rav, once gave me the very good piece of advice. He said, really, ideally, the optimal size for a Kehillas should never be larger than 80, 85 mishpachas, because then it gets too big and you cannot really support them and deal with them properly to support them and create a real kesher. And I think perhaps more than anything else, what families, especially young families, need, wherever they come from, whatever their background is, they need a Rebbe, they need support, they need advice, and they need to be guided to get that balance right.
That's very interesting. There's actually a secular concept in the business world, the theory of 150.
Yes.
More than 150 people in an office place, it's not going to work efficiently.
Similar sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was a child, I was always told that if people are learning Kabbalah, it means that they're 40 years old. You're not allowed to learn these things before you turn 40. And, I got a little older. I saw that was based on a shach, that the shach writes that way. But it seems that a lot of other svarim have different numbers, different ages, whether it's 20 or 35. Rabbi Chananel has a lot of 50, different possibilities. But like any of these svarim that are classically learned, even in the classic Yeshiva, Nefesh HaChaim, if you don't know any Kabbalah, then you can't really get very far. Has something changed? Are we now allowed to learn Kabbalah at an earlier age? What exactly does it mean when we have these limitations? When does a person know if he's ready? And if he's not ready, does that mean he's not ready for most of the classic Sifrei Chassidus, or even, again, like a Nefesh HaChaim, which is obviously far from a Sefer Chassidus?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, I'm certainly no authority, but just share with you some of the things that I've sort of come across. And again, when you talk about Nefesh HaChaim, I suppose even Shadalad, even when I say even Shadalad, it certainly presupposes some familiarity with the concept of Sfiras, the concept of Eilamos, and you're right, a strict literalist reading of the Shach, and others would be, you've got to be Mamala Kreise, B'Shas U'Poskim, before you can move on. So has something changed? I would like to humbly suggest, and I'll give you the Makoros in a minute, that yes, definitely something has changed. There's no question about it. And it goes back really to my first comment in terms of Hashgacha. That things have changed, and so just maybe quickly go through a few of the Makoros. So there's the famous Zayar in Parshas Nosoi, which is quoted by Chaim Vital, which is quoted by the Gaon and Evan Shleim and others, that we will Yipkun Migalusa will get out of the Golus b'zchus of the limud of Soidus and Soidus HaTorah. Now that in itself, of course, does not indicate any license to anybody to learn it any earlier at a lower age or to lower the threshold. Having said that, it does firmly indicate, and this is something that is accepted by those that comment on these things, including the Vilna Gaon clearly, is that the limud of Soidus and Sistrei HaTorah is an important one and is linked to Geula. I'm going to quote a little bit from two parts of a sefer from Rabbi Yisroel Weinberger, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha, where he writes in some mechtavim, he writes two very interesting things, which I just want to quickly share with you. He says, "B'seif hameah ha'heile elef didon, ha'yrido ha'shchina daled neshamas gedolos l'toich ha'lamenu." So at the end of the 5th century of this millennium, the Rabbonim Shalom brought down 4 great neshamas into this world. Ashahem yiyu ikrei mamshichei hakav shel gilui Torah ha'arizal, that they would be the main ones that would spread and publicize and manifest the Torah of the Aryeh. Shmeisei Makadoshim Hem HaRashash Zal, Ramchal Zal, Hagro Zal, V'Habesh Zal. These 4 great neshamas. And then he goes into a lot of technical detail to explain where they diverged, where they converged. Clearly the indication is there is no question that the ideas, you only need to open up a Michtav Melio. So clearly Michtav Melio, it's well known that a lot of it is based on Tanya, and a lot of it is based on ideas that 200 years ago were absolutely considered to be in the Rosh Hashanah, and they went out there in the Rosh Hashanah. And of course, I presume it goes without saying, we're not talking about the distortions of the various terrible institutions, the Kabbalah Center and these other sort of things. We're talking about Emesa Torah, Emesa Kabbalah. That's what you're asking.
Yeah, so, we're talking about Yerei Mishleimim.
Yerei Mishleimim, of course. So the Gaon in a few places in Evan Shlomo talks about the importance of learning Seder HaTorah. He doesn't, as far as I had a quick look through Evan Shlomo before, he doesn't seem to reference directly in terms of the age. He does say actually in Ches Chof Beis, he says, Mikodem tzarich lilmud halachos ulekayim oisam kshehem kelechem levavenish yisod v'achar kach yasik belimud hasidus shenim shlu liyayin v'shemen. But that doesn't really indicate
very high. I mean, that's just that you know the halacha, so you know how to.
Yeah. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to. So the closest that I found, which I think hopefully will be illuminating to your listeners, is again in the same sefer. It's a michta from Rabbi Yisroel Weinberger, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha, and I'm going to read and direct, if I may. It's 3 lines, but I'm going to read direct. Ubihiyos shekamo shoyalim, and given that many people ask, Umi hitironu likonos ba, who allowed us to enter into the paradise, as it were? Halei reshus hayochid. It was very clearly confined to the Yechidei Segula. So he says, Haraisim divrei bal haleshem zal b'sefer Aryeh chelik aleph b'shem hagon Rabbi Yisroel Salanta zatzal. The leshem, Rabbi Yashiv Zecher Tzadik Livrocha Zayda, the leshem writes in the name of Rabbi Yisroel Salanta, Shemishnas Tofreish V'Elech, that from the year 1860. Yotza mirshus hayochid lichlal rishus harabim ad kan dvar v'kedoshim. So we have no less a mainstream personality than the doyen of the Musa movement, Rabbi Yisroel Salanta, saying that Mishnas Tafreish, that's a direct quote, Yotza mirshus hayochid lichlal rishus harabim. I'm not going to even add comment, but that is a direct quote. There's one more quote he brings here from the Baal Sidrei Taharos, in a Michtav, the famous Sidrei Taharos on the Kelim and Arles, who writes, in contrast to a time when most of Klal Yisrael was strong in their Emunah, and anybody, and he would have to, it's a longer quote, so I won't read through the whole thing, but he says, today he says, and let's get the right words, Yesh bezedai v'hoisel mishadoresh es Hashem v'roitzel ikonos b'kodesh pnima lehetiv darkov is mutter to do so. Again, that's not license being granted, and in terms of an age, I think there are a couple of comments maybe that perhaps need to be said. I mean, we could quibble over the definition of Kabbalah. What does Kabbalah mean when we say Kabbalah? There's the Chitzonius, there's the Pnimius, there's so many different levels, but the basic broad ideas, such as the Nefesh HaChaim brings in, such as Naran Chai and basic Oilamos and those sort of ideas, clearly there is a hashgacha that those things should be. The Rabbonim Shalom, I think, clearly wants that these things should be studied, albeit with the caveats, with a Rebbe, and there has to be Yira B'Shas Limud, Tikkun Maisa B'Chol Eis, as the Ramchal writes in Derech Hashem, but clearly they can add to having a deeper insight into the Chochmas HaTorah, the Kedusha of Torah, is if it's done appropriately, and again, under the guidance of an appropriate Rebbe, is certainly something that clearly is the Rabbonim Shalom seems to want us to be engaging in.
Yeah. If I could just ask one more question.
Sure.
Are there any ideas that have become popularized or even almost mainstream that are very concerning? Meaning, there always was this concern that someone who's not Mali Kreso, B'Shasu Poskim, is going to misunderstand some of the ideas that are out there and is going to corrupt them in one way or another. Has that happened within mainstream or even the fringes of communities of Shomer Torah mitzvahs?
It's a hard one. Yeah, I'm not sure that I can think of any direct examples of that. I think sadly, our challenges perhaps come almost from the other side, from the left, from those who are still purporting to be orthodox, but who clearly are no longer orthodox in the normative understanding of what that means, and those that are far more liberal. Although interestingly, even though they often claim to be the rationalist ones, they're quite keen to grasp the quote-unquote spiritual side of things when it suits them, the kumsitz, kumbaya type of things. So we're polarizing, we're going everywhere at once. Whether within our kreiser am I aware of any distortions as such? If I'm honest, I'm not sure that I am. You have Rabbi Yaakov Meyer Shechter, and you have Rabbi Yitzchak Meyer Morgenstern, and you have great people who are teaching their Talmidim and giving them access to deeper Torah, but I believe they are doing it in a way that is coupled with a heightened Shmiras HaMitzvahs and Limud HaTorah and demanding Tahara and Kedusha, and in that sense it's aspirational. So unless I'm totally missing something, either in Eretz Yisrael or in America, but you're better qualified to answer that, I'm not sure that there is, because like I said before, something like the Kabbalah Center is so obviously non-authentic as far as we're concerned that it's not relevant to us. That's not the issue.
No, I was referring if there's anything much more, insidious or less obvious to. Okay.
I'm not aware of any. It doesn't mean there aren't any.
Okay. I just want to thank you very much. This has been absolutely enlightening, and it should all be lahagdil Torah la'adira. We should be able to be zochet to see many, many more Jews having a closer relationship with the Ribbono Shel Olam. So I thank you very, very much for your time.
Amen. Amen v'amen. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Bracha v'hatzlacha and everything that you do. Kol tov.